Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join Martin, Dave, Spencer and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
So welcome to another T2 Hubcast. It's Martin Johnson, CEO of Trans2. I'm really excited today because I've got a special guest in. As you know, we do various hubcasts where we talk about certain topics in leadership and management, and we often interview people from the business world. Well, today we've got a guest in from a completely different environment, from professional sport. It's Lee Radford, who is the head coach of Hull FC, Hull FC Rugby League team up in Hull. And if you're listening to this and you're not familiar with rugby league because you're in the south or you're anywhere else, it's a big deal up here. And Lee has been the head coach of Hull FC for Lee. How many?
5 years.
5 years, and most notorious for back-to-back Challenge Cup wins in 2016 and 2017, which included a famous win at Wembley finally in first time in Hull FC's history. So basically, really lucky to have him because Lee's one of the most successful coaches in Hull FC history, without a shadow of a doubt. He's in his sixth year. Would this be the sixth year?
It's coming up my fifth.
So this will be the fifth year. So what I wanted to do is I've done some work with Hull FC myself from a performance psychology perspective, and I've had the pleasure of working with Lee and the team from a coaching perspective and with the players. It's been a real eye-opener for me. It's given me an insight into high-performing teams in sport. It's been challenging at times, but there is a difference between the way we lead cultures and teams and we manage in sport to the way it works in businesses. So what I wanted to do is I want to interview Lee, or we're going to debate some stuff. And I want us to think, for any managers and leaders listening to this, I want you to think about some of the things we're talking around and think about your own teams and how you apply this in the workplace and see if you can take something from it. So welcome, Lee. Thanks for giving up your time. I guess let's do this chronologically, right? Leadership in sport. Let me ask you the first question. I'll bring you in on the first thing. Leadership in sport, what is it like for your sins?
Yeah. From a coaching perspective, I'd say it's difficult.
Yeah.
I would say it's very difficult managing the environment and managing some of the challenges that you face, external challenges. From a playing perspective, as a player and leading, in a captain's capacity, a lot easier. I think it's a lot easier when you're actually going into battle with someone and you can lead from the front and it has more kudos that they're following what you're doing.
And you know what, you raise a really good point almost straight off. Two types of leadership, and we resonate with this in businesses. When you're the coach or the manager, it's a completely different. What you're saying is it's a completely different scenario to when you're a leader within a group. So you're almost still at peer level. We call them on the ground influencers in the workplace. So when you played, you elevated into a sort of a leadership position, but you were still a part of the group. So leading by example and being able to be out there with them for you was probably easier than elevating to a coach's level. Is that what you're saying?
Definitely, yeah. I think you're questioning yourself a lot more in the coaching capacity than you are as an actual player. I think the fact that you can have instant impact on a game as well is a powerful thing as well. So certainly from a playing, from a playing professional career, it was easier to lead in that manner than it has been to coaching. Definitely.
Yeah. And do you think, so one of the questions we get quite a lot is, when a person has been a member of a team for a while and they're one of the lads or one of the lasses or whatever it might be, they're just a peer, they're part of the team, and then they get promoted from within to the coach's job, so they're now either coaching or managing the players they used to be a part of. That is more difficult than arguably being drafted in from external, not knowing the players and then assuming the position of coach. Would you agree, or would you say?
I've never done that. I've never done the latter,
yeah.
But I have done the fair.
Yeah.
I became assistant and then obviously became head coach. But I genuinely think that was one of my pluses, was the fact that I had good relationships with a lot of the squad that was there, that I inherited.
Yeah.
There was a lot of trust there, and they knew how to take me. I knew what there was as well. Having played with a lot of them, so. that was quite an easy. Everybody says that's a difficult transition. I don't think that was.
Yeah, because you leverage the relationships.
Yeah.
Just a question on that. What we advise for people and managers who do elevate from the team is we see a couple of scenarios. Some people get into the job and they've got good relationships with the people, but they take a drastic action in a direction. So they either become, right, this is my gig now, I'm going to lay the law down and make radical changes, or they go, I still want to be everybody's mate, so I'm going to overcompensate on the relationships. Whereas I find what the best leaders do transition is they find the middle ground. So they go, I'm going to make it my own, but I'm not going to be too drastic early on. I'm going to see how the land lies, but I'm also going to understand that I'm not everybody's friend as well. So I'm going to try and maintain the relationship, but I'm not going to be too drastic too early. Was that your path, or did you find yourself?
I was in a bit of a different scenario. Yeah, I think when I initially got the job, I think there was need for change.
Right.
There was a lot of disgruntled players within the group. There was a little bit of lack of direction at the time as well. So I think it did need radical change. It did need some markers putting down. When you look back now, 5 years later, it was pretty drastic. Some of the stuff.
But I remember that time, and it sort of did feel fresh and new, and it was the beginnings of something for the first time in a long time. So it was situational that you had to maybe go in, take that.
I don't, was it deliberate? Possibly not. I just felt it needed it at the time, and obviously, as you get your own team and you get your own group and you get a little bit more comfortable with them, maybe you do take your foot off the throat a little bit. But it certainly needed it. There was some things going on from a club perspective that just needed changes, and I think the players was refreshed that it changed as well, and it went in the club's favour.
Yeah, absolutely. So, question to you. Leadership. What's your style like? What do you have a style? Obviously everybody's situational. We can change.
Yeah,
what's your default style?
Very direct, I think.
Yeah.
I think, and there's a reason for that. I appreciated that as a player. That's how I wanted to.
Yeah.
That's how I wanted to be led. I wanted to know where I was and what I needed to do to get better. When I'd not done it, I wanted to be told, and when I'd done it, I wanted a little bit of applause for that as well. So I think that is the easiest way of describing.
So because you're, I've done work with you, and we've done a lot on unconscious motivators and personal motivators, and your drivers are very much, to be strong and self-reliant and to get stuff done, and there is a right way to do things, and even the hierarchical structure you like. There's a position in the group, and you have the respect of people, and you carry out your duties to the best of your ability, and therefore because that's how you operate for years, and you grew up under an era of Radford, right, with people like Jimmy Lowes and Joe Vanganart and Bernard Dwyer, and we've talked about it many a times. You had to toe the line. They were very directive, very authoritative figures, wasn't they? And look at the success you had in that very sort of powerful senior group. So I guess you've sort of then adopted that in your leadership style as your default position, because it's what you've known. Would that be fair to say? It's how you've grown up. It's
definitely, yeah. I think that generation of players there that I don't think it was any coincidence we had the success we did with that group of players we had. Don't get me wrong, very, very talented as well, but well coached and very driven people and authoritative. A lot of it,
But
looking back, it's surprising there weren't so many clashes. Because there was a lot of senior blokes there who had very opinionated. This is how we do it. Thankfully, for the Bulls, there was all on the same page.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful thing when you've got so many strong personalities like that all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, same direction, which is key. And you did have some contrast, and this is important in sport in a squad, isn't it? Because you did have some contrast with, for example, you always talk about Henry Paul being a really key presence in a squad, and that if Henry Paul was on the team sheet, you almost knew it was going to be a W. You always knew it was always going to be a win because his presence lifted everybody else. But he wasn't a barking, aggressive character. So how would you explain that? What did he bring?
Talent,
first and foremost.
Yeah. Talent and drive was the two things that stand out for him as a professional sportsman. unbelievably talented, but knew it.
Yeah.
He had the swag.
Yeah.
And because she sat next to him in the changing room, you felt a little bit, like I said, you knew he was going into a game, a final, a semi-final. You felt a little bit better about yourself lining up next to him. But
what was his
he
style?
wasn't a social. He wasn't a social. A professional, the ultimate professional. He was far from it. He enjoyed.
Yeah, he enjoyed his leisure time.
He enjoyed very much so. I think he brought a rap record out at one time. I thought he went in that direction. He was a complex character, but he enjoyed the nightlife.
What was his leadership style then? He wasn't aggressive, but did he just lead by example?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I think if he felt like he had something to say, he'd say it. But 9 times out of 10, he'd just do things on the field, and you'd almost that was amazing. But what he was as hard as he partied, he'd rock in. We used to stay over on a Saturday night. He'd rock in at 4 in the morning. At 10 o'clock, come conditioning, he'd be at the front of the.
He'd still be able to do it.
And it was always amazing. We had a cluster of players that could do that, and it always amazed me how they could live that lifestyle and still turn up and give that.
And do you know what probably works there? Now, we'll link this into Hull FC's teams of the past and then maybe to the present day. But so in that team then in Bradford, you had Brian Noble, who was a very sort of motivational, knowledgeable coach, had the squad behind him. You had the blend of authoritative figures like Bernard Dwyer and Joe Vangenaar and Jimmy Lowes and some of the other really big characters. You had the talent like Robbie and Henry Paul, who didn't have to be aggressive but led by example and give comments. So that the whole was greater than the sum of its parts is what you're sort of saying. You need, in leadership in teams, you need the authoritative figures, you need the sort of slightly maverick, talented players, and you need a great coach. And when it all comes together, that's what makes for success.
Definitely, yeah. I think, looking back at that group as well, unbelievable amount of players that have gone on to be coaches from that. That. To have so much leadership in a team and not have a lot of conflict between each other, I think that looking back, that was pretty incredible as well. That everybody had an opinion and everybody's very opinionated, but for whatever reason, everybody's opinion was very similar in that group.
Yeah, and then I look at Hull FC teams, sort of when you were playing as well. When you look back at when we had strong leadership, or times when we've had strong leadership within a group, you look at, for example, people like Richard Swain or Stephen Kearney. Now, different type of leaders. Kearney sort of commanded men, and he had that presence and that communication, that respect and that credibility. Don't get me wrong, he was great on the field as well, but he had that. Swainey wasn't so much, I don't know, you know more than me, but Richard Swain wasn't so much an aggressive, commanding player, but he had the credence from that. A little bit like Danny Houghton in the modern era. He leads by example on the field. He's not going to ask of anything of anybody else what he's not willing to do. If that would make sense. And
I think not just on the field, I think on the training field as well.
Yeah, from professionals.
How he was as a professional, he was the ultimate pro. He was at the front of everything he did from a physical perspective. How he approached games, he was 110% Mr. Rugby League. His preparation was really articulate leading into every game, and then he went and delivered. And that demands respect. You cannot play next to a bloke like that and not admire what he does. Yeah.
So would you say then, summarising this first point, leadership in sport splits into two. It's the leadership at coaching and staff level, but it's also the leadership within the playing group. And if you've got a combination of both, surrounded by the right talent as well, that's where the magic happens. And if any one of those are slightly out of kilter, if you're lacking a level of leadership at a coaching level, or you're lacking a level of leadership within the group, it can be a challenge. I think that's what you're saying.
I 100% agree with that. And I think when you get all three together, I think it's a lethal.
Yeah, talent plus leadership on the field, plus leadership in the coaching.
The right people at ground level, great leadership up top, and more so in sport than probably in business.
Yeah,
and talent is obviously hugely important as well.
Yeah, which brings me to my second point of I was going to ask you on success in sport. How much is it down to talent versus mindset? Now, the reason I ask that is because I've done a lot of mental skills coaching with you. We've done a lot of innovative things with the players, with the coaching staff. Some have been successful, others have been a challenge, right? But it is unlike any other environment I've ever operated in, because when we go into businesses or into other environments, culturally, the cultural element and the mindset and the mental side of performance is huge, right? Don't get me wrong, the best sportsmen and women and teams out there, you could name them, your Tiger Woods, your Novak Djokovic, your Wigan Warriors of the 90s, your Man Uniteds under Ferguson, they're mentally strong, right? So there is, but what I observed in a sport environment with you, Lee, is that talent, you can try and be as mentally strong as you want, but you cannot. In business, we say hire the right people and skill them even if they've not got the skills, whereas you can't get away with that. So how much is it a balancing act? How much do you have to sacrifice character, some behavioural traits wise to get the right player and the right talent? Or do you place a higher onus on actually having a squad of the right people, and even if you've not got 3 superstars in, or I don't know, what's the blend?
I think it's a real fine line. I think it's becoming more, the participation in the sport now is becoming less every year. And I think the talent pool is getting smaller.
Yeah.
I think more and more we're now relying on talent, more than the other.
Yeah, because what you're saying is you aren't blessed with waves of talent coming through. So if somebody isn't showing the right behaviours, now don't get me wrong, right? You've made some key decisions in the past around this anyway, and in the brave decisions, right? And they've been proven right, but you're not able to do that as much anymore because you've got a thin squad. There's not a wave of talent coming through. So you might have 3 or 4 very talented players, but professional-wise, you want improvements or behavioural or traits, but you've got to sort of say, what am I willing to try and manage and put up with to keep the balance of great culture, great squad, but we've got to be competitive and we've got to win. We've got to,
Yeah, and I think persevering with more talented players will create life a little bit more challenging for you is becoming more and more, because of the talent pool getting smaller. But I just think making sure that player or that individual doesn't upset the group is the minute that starts happening, or he starts towing the line where it becomes his work becomes difficult to manage, and once you start hearing whispers and rumblings around the group, that then becomes even more challenging for you to manage.
Because then your decision is, I can't afford to lose this player off the pitch, but
I can't afford to
lose the group. I can't. Yeah. And that's where sometimes you've got to experience the short-term pain for the long-term gain. And I certainly think that over the time, and the reason not many rugby league coaches have a 5-year tenure, right? They don't. So
I'm the longest serving.
You are. So I think you've got that balance right now. I'll just mention at one thing here, and you'll probably smart because we don't talk like this often. But there's one thing I really admire in you, which is you are directive and you are tough, right? And at times you do command the compliance from people around you. But you're also, and I'm not sure a lot of people see this, you will also defend players and support and back players where it's due. Fearless. How would you say it? Fearless. Whatever it means. Fiercely. You will do that. And I sort of then observe that as long as you get that contrast right, I don't know if this is a conscious decision from you, but if you back and support people in their time of need, you earn the right to be directive at a later point. Would you say that's true? Whereas if you were just directive and harsh all the time and there was no, it might not work. If you were just constantly backing players when they're wrong or when they're not performing, you wouldn't get it right. But if you've got the blend where it's due, I'll back you. But listen, I need this from you. I need, Yeah,
it's a tough one. Yeah, sometimes I'll read obviously reports of the team or comments about the team, that are critical, and I can't tell you how much it gets me back up and upsets me. It's almost like you're insulting my players, you're insulting my team here. But then I feel I have the right to be critical after a result, after a performance. But I think you genuinely care about the group that is underneath you. I think that has been a consistent throughout my coaching period. Sometimes it don't feel like that to the individual, I'm pretty sure, but it a bit of that tough love. But you know, I think the friendship side of success is something we've not touched on as well. You know, the togetherness of a group sometimes can be a really powerful thing, and I think every team or every little bit of success I've had as a player or as a coach, I think that's been pretty high on the agenda. Everybody has enjoyed the working environment, coming into training. Everybody's got each other's backs, and everybody's willing to go that extra mile for one another. Last year, you know, finished in an unbelievably disappointing in terms of results and where we was, but through an unbelievably tricky situation, I still felt, you know, we still had each other's backs, and I think that, you know, that was quite a good advert for the group, I think.
Yeah, I talk about this on previous podcasts and other things around in businesses, creating a social ecosystem. So it's not just you turn up, it's transactional, you do your job, you get paid, you go home. Businesses thrive when people build meaningful friendships within a business, when you feel like you go into work with, you know, one thing the military gets right is the brothers type feel. You feel like you're alongside friends, almost brothers, which means collaboratively you'll go above and beyond for each other. It's the same in sport. If everybody just turns up and goes, I'm collecting a wage bill, I'm playing the sport, I go home, I don't feel that camaraderie within the group, you're not going to be as successful as when you've got a really close, we call it peak rapport, don't we?
Yeah, and I think that's unbelievably difficult to manufacture.
Yeah, you can't manufacture it.
You can't manufacture friendship between two blokes that clearly don't get along.
But what you can do, Lee, I'm sure you'll agree, is you can create an environment that allows them to at least try and foster those relationships.
Definitely, yeah, and I think that's why, you know, where recruitment is so important. You know, making sure that the individual that you bring in, you know, isn't going to be disruptive to the group, or, you know, he's going to get along with the group almost. To a certain extent, it's a bit of a punt still because you don't know him personally.
Yeah.
But, you know, in terms of recruitment, I have a close, you know, group that I will lean on to, you know, whether it be on these shows or
for a character assessment,
or across the other side of the world,
and
in Australia.
And without giving too much away, we've done innovative things that because I like the fact that you're always open to trying innovative ways. We've done a little bit of psychometric testing where we try and uncover the unconscious motivators and drivers of a player and try and correlate that to performance. I think what we've experienced from it is there's no exact science to it because there's some players who can perform but they have certain motivators. What we do find is there are certain motivators that are aligned to leadership, which gives you an idea of if we're bringing a potential leader of men in rather than just a player. So you're trying that sort of stuff, but I think you do in your recruitment try really hard, don't you, on the character, to do the character assessment piece as much as this bloke's a talented player.
Yeah, and it's the old cliche, you know, is he a good bloke?
Yeah,
you know, that gets the amount of times that phrase gets used. You want a good individual coming through. You want him to tick all them boxes. But obviously, again, if the talent is not there, then it doesn't matter how much of a good bloke he is. He's not going to bring success to you.
I've done some work with Sean Fitzpatrick, or the New Zealand All Black, former World Cup winning captain. We've spoken at the same events, and I listened to his talk, and you've probably heard it yourself, Lee. They have a policy in the All Blacks, and it's a legitimate policy, and it's called the No Dickhead policy, right? And he says this very candidly on stage, and he challenges business leaders, and he challenges any leader in any environment to foster this. But he says, in the All Blacks, I know they're blessed with talent, right? So they can do this, but they have a No Dickhead policy, which means if you come in, it doesn't matter how good you are. If you're a dickhead, or to translate that to people, if you're not the right type of person who's going to bring the right attitude and behaviours and discipline to our environment, you're not getting in. It's like you've said, in rugby league, the talent pool is shrinking. It's not as easy for you to do that, but you're trying.
I honestly think even in their sport, it's changing a little bit. You know, when McCaw retired, there was some incidents there with the All Blacks, you know, 5 or 6 off-field incidents where that wouldn't have happened under his watch. You know, it wouldn't have happened 5 years prior because they'd have got nowhere near wearing an All Black jersey. But I think.
So do you think the No Dickhead policy's waning a little bit?
I do, yeah. I genuinely think it's a talent issue. I think people are making exceptions because of that, and I think you have to. It's the nature of the beast. You know, if the talent pool isn't there, you have to bring a Paul Pogba in. You know, unfortunately, that's what. You know, the owl. You know, the old leader, great professional, fantastic player, you know, everything you want. There's becoming so less and less. You have to bend the rules a little bit.
Yeah, and you know what? Look at two of your decisions over previous years. Albert Kelly, Jake Connor, fantastic players, wonderful talent, and purely seeing in them what they bring on the field, like the Henry Paul factor, has significantly contributed to Hull FC's success. And that's what you say in the contrast between the right talent, but with a general right group of behaviours and traits and characteristics. It's got to all go in the pot.
Yeah.
Because you could have the best group of blokes, right? I'm not saying no one's a good bloke, but you could have the best ultimate professionals, you know, old school style of leadership and communication in the fit. But if they can't play, you're not going to win a game.
100%. But I think the environment they've come into as well has helped them.
Yeah.
We've had a good environment. You know, starting from day one of my recruitment. Again, you know, you talk about the no dickheads. I had another word for it. But you know, it was
for a different.
It was of the same philosophy. Yeah, it was of, you know, making sure whoever walks through the door is not, you know, is going to be worth your while, and everything you're putting into him from a club perspective. So they've come into a good group.
Yeah.
And thankfully, touch wood, you know, they've been a pleasure to work with today.
Yeah. So last part, culture as a whole. I mean, I brought something into you, or I presented something to you a few years back, Lee, which was the elite sports equation. And the elite sports equation, for anybody listening, is five factors of high performing teams in sport. It's you have the right talent, which we've discussed, number one, in the right environment, number two, and then if you wrap these other three things around it, they've got to be technically good at what they do. They've got to be mentally strong and physically strong, certainly in your sport. So in rugby league, the elite sports equation is talent, environment, technical, mental, physical. Which do you think is the most important? Are we coming back to the same?
I think it's I don't like it, but I think it's leaning towards talent.
Yeah.
You know, I do.
You can get away with some of the others not being perfect if you've got the right
others.
talent.
Yeah, I do. I just, you know, and that's changed over the last 2 or 3 years. You know, Gareth Ellis, our assistant coach, you know, unbelievable player for Great Britain over the years, and incredible career, has just literally come back from Melbourne Storm, and their football manager, you know, was one of the most successful in the business, Frank Panisi. He spent 2 weeks following Frank out there, and you know, Gaz came back and said they're doing nothing different. You know, there's no secret to the success. Yeah. They're just very, very, very fortunate, and Frank will tell you this. Their 3 best players, and what I call generation players, 3 of the best players to play the game, you know, in Cooper Cronk and Cameron Smith and Billy Slater, just happen to be the most professional, the most driven, and most talented rugby league players in their group. So to have them as your leadership group, and when they recruit a player from nowhere, you know, and he sees what they're doing every day and the amount of hours of work they're putting in and how hard they're actually working, and how they won't allow any misdemeanors off the field to hamper their success. That's an incredible formula, and that's what every coach
dreams of.
In every sport is dreaming of. But the reason we're talking about them and the reason they're so famous is because the rarity of them as well.
And the reason they sort of the first thing that to your point that allowed them to command that respect was the talent. The first thing was that, listen, these are unbelievable players. I want to follow and replicate them. And then they're just lucky that they were great managers of people as well. You know, great blokes, great professionals, great people. But what we're saying though, Lee, is talent is important and you can get by on it. But if you can get talent with the right environment and your squad and players are technically, mentally, and physically prepared, then that's where you want to be.
So it is a scenario. You want a good culture. You want to try and promote a good culture. You want people working for one another. You want them turning up with smiles on their faces. You want them going the extra mile, you know, in terms of performance. But if the talent in there, and you do not get the results in this industry, them good people quickly the atmosphere changes. Yeah. How they rock up on a Monday changes. My opinion of you changes. Yeah. Your opinion of me changes. And
friction,
it can quickly
friction
become
occurs.
negative. So if any one of them, not where they need to be, that can also be a formula for failure as well. If the talent's not there, it don't matter how good of a group you've got and how close you are and tight knit. Fingers some get pointed when results don't go your way. Business, I would imagine it's the same. Certainly in a sporting environment, it's the same.
So what you're saying is, you can have a great environment with great coaches. You can prepare
unbelievable culture.
You can have a great culture, prepare your players physically, mentally, and technically. But if they don't have the raw talent, right, you're going to be. And like you say, it's a results-driven business. Is sport. So it's like sales in business. When the results aren't there, people's behaviours change.
100%.
And for anybody listening, I think it's very quick sometimes to judge from the outside around players being recruited or selection or whatever it might be. But you have to understand that you're only ever 4 or 5 results away from not only being under pressure in the competition, but being at risk of losing the group. So it is a real leadership in sport for me is hard because in businesses you've got a lot of people, you've got time to upskill. It's a completely different. Whereas in sport, you've got a smaller pool of talent, and you've got a balance. It's a results-driven business. You've got to get results, and you can't just do that based purely on culture. Is what you're saying?
Definitely. And as much as I'd like it to be that way, unfortunately, it just isn't the case. Talent goes an awful long way, and like I said, I think it's becoming more and more important. Because of the lack of numbers playing the sport.
Yeah, cool. You know what, Lee? That's a fascinating insight. There's no further questions from me, so I think we'll just sort of wrapping it up. And I think if we just sort of encapsulate everything we've discussed, which has been fascinating, leadership for you is twofold. It's leadership at a management and coaching level, and it's leadership within a group, on the ground leadership. You need the two. In an environment to perform. If one is out of kilter or lacking, it can be a challenge. Success in sport, the elite sports equation, it's around talent, environment. Then your players have to be technically, mentally, and physically strong. But you would always say that without talent, you have nothing or you have very little. So talent is the most important in a sporting environment. You need to be able to have the blend of the naturally gifted, at times maverick players with the professionals and the hard workers, and that balance in the squad really works. And culture is important. In an ideal world, you think environments, you absolutely should be trying to foster a culture and a way of working. And you look at the All Blacks culture, and you look at Leeds Rhinos culture, and the Man United in the 90s culture. It is really important, but it's a very results-driven business. So you're only ever 4 or 5 results away from potentially being under pressure, but also changing the dynamic in the group altogether. So I don't envy you, Lee. I don't envy you. I don't envy you. No, right, last question for this, because we've got just a couple of minutes. Generations. Right. I talk about this in business all the time. We are seeing, so for people out there, I just want to put to bed a myth that people get wrong around generations. Everybody talks about millennials, and millennials get a lot of stick around millennials are these days. Listen, millennials are people born after 1980, right? I am a millennial. People up to 36 years old are millennials. They're already in businesses and in organisations.
Anyone else, I like to tell people I'm a millennial.
Lee's just on the other side of a millennial. He's on the cusp of millennial. But anyway, the point is these some older millennial of the generation of millennials are in places and in positions of command, authority, leadership. Yet the younger end of the millennials are young, but there's Generation Z. There's Generation Z, and Generation Z are the next generation, if you like, the teens and the late teens. Either way, what we're saying is the lower end of the millennials and the Generation Z, in the workplace, we're seeing a shift. It's a different generation, of course. I think older generations struggle sometimes to get in their world and to collaborate with them. My view firmly has always been we've got to change, we've got to adapt, we've got to evolve. There are people entering your squad, the workplace, who have grown up entirely in the digital world and technology. There are people, and if you add to this as well, the young players coming through, Lee, we talk about this all the time, have never been in a real, not a real job, because that's not fair to say, but they've never been They get recruited. Yeah, they get recruited very early, almost in school, and signed up on a scholarship. And all you've ever known is professional sport and rugby. So, are you seeing a shift from a generational perspective in the type of player coming through? And do you believe, therefore, clubs and coaching staff have to adjust and evolve if they want to get the best out of players? Or do you think we need to be standing firm and trying to bring them into our way of working? Or is it a mixture?
I'll talk to you, I'll give you an example of adaptation from my own perspective. So when I first, 2 years into my reign at Hull, social media wasn't a part of what I did in my youth. Obviously, it wasn't there. It was there towards the back end of my playing career, but didn't take a fancy to it. I didn't want people knowing what I was having for tea. I wasn't taking a snap of it and putting it on Twitter and I can't wait to eat this. That didn't entertain me one bit. What I was eating for tea, I wanted to keep private. So I could never get my head around some of the posts that are out there and some of the. So I could never get my head around taking your shirt off and taking a selfie photo,
and putting it on social media.
I just couldn't grasp it. There's some fantastic figures in our team. It's amazing, and I never had that. I wouldn't have done that anyway. I didn't have the rig to do that, but it just threw me out. And what obviously everybody knew how frustrated I was getting, and they was all sending me screenshots of some of the lads, some of the younger lads, obviously taking photos in the mirror, in the bedroom with the shirts off. So, and
you've gone to our point. You've gone in the space of 15 years. I've gone from sat in the change room with Bernard Dwyer, and sort of old school blokes, and drinking a pint down the pub to this.
And it's been an eye opener. So I introduced a financial fan for it. I said.
Actually find players.
I said, look, this is not the image I want to give out. This is not what we are. This is, I want to be hard working. I want to be humble. I want to be go about my business.
Yeah.
I don't want to sing from the rooftops.
You don't want to bring attention to ourselves
exactly
unnecessarily.
That. I don't want anybody hating us, giving anybody reason to hate us. When you don't need to.
So just to confirm, it's not just a story. You actually brought in a process where you would fine players for taking a selfie without the top on.
Yeah. So originally it was a £25 fine, which isn't a massive amount, but for some young kids that are on, and it tended to be the young kids that was doing it. So for them lads that obviously financially wasn't where they needed to be, it was a lot. So but they continued. One player in particular continued. So I doubled it after a month of it not working. I took 75 quid off him, and I doubled it. I put it up to 50. It happened again. There's another one goes out there, so I text 50. So Ed had fell off one day. I got the group together in the team meeting room, and I said, right. I said, the next one that I see do this, I'm going to bring you out in front of the group. I'm going to give you a skinhead. I'm going to shave your hair, blade back in front of everyone. To put a stop to this.
Can you imagine?
So that's my adaptation. I promise you, it stopped from that day onwards. It's never happened since.
So, if any managers in businesses are listening out there, great piece of advice from Lee Radford. If you're not commanding compliance from team members, threaten to shave their head in front of the peers.
You'd be amazed with the amount of success you have from that simple action.
But I guess. Funny story, but I guess the point you're making there is it is different. It's a different world.
They're more worried about their image than they are the pocket.
Yeah.
That quickly became apparent, and it's a joke, and would I have done it? Probably. But it said a lot to me about the next generation.
So how do you deal with that then? Do you agree with me that I think the best chance we've got is to understand them and adapt ourselves, or do you think there's a middle ground where you say, listen, I'm willing to adapt a little bit. I get it, I understand, but here's my non-negotiables. Yeah, is that your standpoint?
Yeah, I think you cannot change what you are. What you are is what you've developed into. I think for you to change overnight, because they've changed overnight, you'd be lying to yourself.
So it's unfair to think that in either camp there's going to be a drastic change. So what you're saying is maybe that middle ground is what you've got to try and find.
I think there's got to be a little bit more acceptance. This is what they are.
As hard as it is for you.
It's very difficult, and I'll shunt it to myself a lot of the day. But I think they also need to be, look, this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah.
And this is, and that's new to a couple of the young blokes. They're not used to. They've never been told that's wrong. So that's alien to them as well. And there's got to be some adaptation from them. But ultimately, at the moment, if they want to play, I'm the bloke who owns the the key to that door. So there is still a element of power there that you can use.
Final question before we wrap it up, because we're just coming up 40 minutes, 45 minutes, which I think is about right. Resilience. Now, you have always been quite a tough, resilient person as a player, as a character. You've always said, in your early career, not the fastest, not the most natural, but tough and resilient and trained hard and worked hard. And the teams you played in were like that. I think what I have observed over recent years is even when you've struggled at Hull with injuries last year, even when I can think of one game, Wakefield last year, where we got pumped by a huge number. It just all got on top of us, but not under your reign. There's not been many of them days, right? So even when I remember, was it the Challenge Cup semi-final last year? Was it quarters or semi? Quarters. We were with Saints. Yeah. We were decimated. We were walking wounded, and we nearly pulled it off. There's a level of resilience within the group that somehow you've manufactured, or you've managed to get them to at least be competitive and commit in every single game. Now, you know what? We have games where it doesn't work. We mentioned
like that. Sometimes, yeah.
But there is, in general, a grit and a resilience there. Do you try and coach and foster that? Is that something you're communicating? How do you do that? I know some of your training methods around wrestling and boxing, and you do put them in quite a tough environment. Is that something you would say is fundamental to success? Is resilience and grit, regardless of the talent at times?
Yeah, I think any team that has had success has a certain amount of that, definitely. Preaching it, is something we do as often as we possibly can. Showing examples of it and praising examples of it is something that we do as well. But also the bloke you bring in, you want to see if he's got a certain amount of resilience. What's he like under the blowtorch?
Is that why in pre-season and in certain training methods that you use, you're testing for that as well? So part of this, let's pair people up and get them wrestling, part of full contact, part of gloving up and going in the ring for 2 minutes. You're trying to test. It's not about the result, and it's not so much about who wins, or it's about have you got the grit and the determination to dig in when it's needed.
Yeah, as an example, say you're due to spar. The gloves are on, your gum shields are on, your scrum hat is on. Putting two blokes, one is clearly going to get a result because of his size and his weight, and you put him against another.
Do you do that on purpose? Do you try and pair up evenly, or do you?
I think what happens is the group watching supports the little fella, which motivates the little fella, which helps the little fella and puts, a little certain amount of steel in there for him to try that little bit harder. I think that's an easy gain, because the group want him to win. They don't want to see the big fella pounding.
And is your sort of theory behind that you could put two big fellas together and two small fellas together to fight, to box, to wrestle, right? But it don't work like that on the pitch. Yeah. You're going to have a little fella on a big fella in the pitch, right, trying to take him down. So you've got to put them into against the odd situation to build that grit and resilience and confidence. Is that sort of?
And I think that promotes to get. Like I said, everybody wants the underdog to win, and although some of them have been physically dominated for 2-3 minutes, whatever that may be, he's the one who gets the most pats on the back at the end. And I think that's a good thing to see amongst the group as well. Yeah,
cool. Right, Rads, we've come to the end of it. Thank you so much for that, mate. I think it's insightful, it's impactful. For anyone who's a fan, a rugby league fan out there, I'm sure you'll find this fascinating, or a sports fan in general. If you listen to this and you're a leader or manager in business, think about some of the things we've talked around leadership. I think one of the key things for me is think about, you're a leader as a manager and you have a leadership team as managers, but who are your leaders on the ground? Who's within the group, in the peer group, who is commanding the respect and driving the standards amongst the group, the on-the-ground influencers? I think that was a big one for me. Talent is important. I do believe in business. You can hire the right people and skill them, so try and focus on characters, behaviours and traits. It doesn't, as we've discussed, work like that to the letter of the law in sport. So where you can recruit talent, it makes your job easier. And resilience, I think that last point there was really, really interesting. We used to have a saying in the military, you train hard and fight easy. I think it's the same in sport, and it goes a long way, and think about how you can deploy that in your department. So thank you, Lee Radford.
Thank you.
And we'll wrap that up there, and we'll see you again for another T2 Hubcast.